use signal when. Hello, my name is Mike Klopfenstein. I'm with Messiah's New Life Tabernacle in Avila, Indiana. It is May the 2nd, so Shabbat Shalom. So this is Bible studies entitled Being Led by the Spirit, Part 3. So I'm going to cover some key points that we talked about in Part 2 real quick. And so when we looked at examples and patterns in the Bible of what being filled with the Spirit looks like and being led by the Spirit, these were some of the things that we learned as we walked through those scriptures. In Exodus, Yahweh called Bezaliah of the tribe of Judah and filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, and in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship for the purpose of building and providing the furnishings of the tabernacle. So it's interesting, this was the first use of the term being filled with the Spirit, when he filled people with the spirit of wisdom and understanding to build the tabernacle and the furnishings thereof. And he also put in his heart that he may teach, both he and Aholiab of the tribe of Dan. Them he filled with wisdom of heart to work all manner of work, of the engraver and of cunning workman, and of the embroiderer in blue, and in purple, and scarlet, and in fine linen, and of the weaver, even of them that do any work, and those that devise cunning work. We also learned the context of kindling no fire on the Sabbath. It was in the context of the industrial work that was required in the building of the tabernacle. And Yahweh stirred the hearts of willing men and women to provide offerings. And Yahweh stirred the hearts of wise women to spin cloth goods. And in Ezekiel's prophecy in chapter 34 of God's glory coming from the east parallels the event of Yeshua's return spoke of in Matthew 24. And the place that Ezekiel prophesies that Yeshua would return to place the soles of his feet to reign and dwell with the children of Israel forever was God's house, the current location of the Temple Mount. And who is God going to stir the hearts of again to build his house? In the parable of the fig tree, with the tender branches and putting forth leaves, is the season when Yahshua returns, as Ezekiel prophesied, will occur. And if this parable represents the birth of Israel as a nation in 1948, Yeshua said that this generation, the generation that existed when Israel became a nation in 1948, shall not pass away until this event occurs. Generations today in Israel live an average of a little over 82 years. And King David stated in Psalms, a man's years shall be 70 years, and if by reason of strength, 80 years. And it's interesting that Yahweh chose David to tell this prophecy. You know, David is, as a king of Israel, is a type of our Messiah. And so he said that the years of a man would be 70 years, and if by reason of strength, 80 years. It's ironic that prophecy there matches the current generation of those living in Israel today. So if this means that Yeshua's return, or if so, then that means that Yeshua's return has to occur prior to 2030. And then in Ezekiel, he was commanded to show the pattern of God's house to Israel, that they might remember their iniquities and turn from them. So why does Ezekiel use this pattern of the temple, of the tabernacle, the temple, to cause them to remember their iniquities and turn from them? Well, it's because that they would have an opportunity to dwell in that eternal house with God forever. And then looking at the examples and patterns beginning in the Torah of those filled with the Spirit, we see a variety of administrations and operations and gifts, but yet the same Spirit. And we learned that people who were filled with the Spirit were given skills in all manner of craftsmanship, were giving a willing heart to give and donate for the building of the tabernacle. They were given a vision. They were given good listening skills and the ability to ask good questions. And people filled with the Spirit were given the ability to speak in other languages. They were also given a merry heart to sing and make melody. And many were given the humility to submit to one another. So all these are examples that we learned as we went through the scriptures, the patterns of those that were filled with the Spirit. Do those align with our understanding and of those filled with the Spirit today? And then people living according to the flesh are carnally minded, and they do not subject themselves to obeying the Torah. In fact, they are often hostile toward the Torah. And then people who live after the Spirit obey the Torah. And then we look at those filled with the Spirit, the fruits of them that are led by that Spirit. They include love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. So now that we have a biblical context of what being filled and led by God's Spirit looks like, let's find out what it means to walk in the Spirit. Does it look different than one who is filled or led by the Spirit of God? The phrase to walk in the Spirit only occurs in 4 books in the Bible, in Isaiah, Ezekiel, Romans, and Galatians. And in those 4 books, it is used only in 6 verses. And so what is the concrete meaning of the term to walk in the phrase to walk in the Spirit? In the Hebrew, it's Strong's number 1980, and it's pronounced halak. It is a primitive root, and it means to walk in a great variety of applications, literally and figuratively. So let's look at the first use of halak to get a concrete meaning of what it means. In Genesis 2:10 is the first occurrence of the word halak. Actually, it's in verse 14, but we have to start in verse 10. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. And dropping down to verse 14. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, that is, it which goeth, halak, toward the east of Assyria. And the 4th river is the Euphrates. And then in Genesis 3, 8, and 9, this is the second use of the word halak, to walk. And they heard the voice of Yahweh, God, walking, halak, in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahweh, God, amongst the trees of the garden. And Yahweh called unto Adam and said, Where art thou? So the concept of walk is the idea of a path that one is on and that guides you. As the river guided by the path that was created for it, so the path in the garden that God created is what guides our footsteps. So this concept is supported in the following verses. In Psalms chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. It says, Blessed is the man that walketh, halak, not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law, or Torah of Yahweh, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And then from Psalms 32:8, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go, halak, and I will guide thee with mine eye. So the concept to walk in the Spirit is first noted in Isaiah 42. And we read, starting in verse 1, Behold my servant, whom I uphold. And we know this is the prophecy of Messiah. It says, Mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him, and he shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. And he shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. And he shall bring forth judgment unto truth. And he shall not fail nor be discouraged, till he have set judgment in the earth. And the isles shall wait for his Torah. And thus saith God, Yahweh, He that created the heavens and the earth, and stretched them out, he that spread forth the earth and that which cometh out of it. He that giveth breath unto the people upon it, and spirit to them that walk therein. For I, Yahweh, have called thee in righteousness, and will uphold thine hand, and will keep thee, and will give thee for a covenant of people, for a light of the Gentiles. So we see here that Yahweh gave the inhabitants of earth not only breath to live, but he also gave his spirit to walk therein, to be guided to follow his Torah. And note the context of the prophecy of Yeshua coming to bring judgment to the Gentiles and the isles that shall wait for his Torah. And the next place the term walk occurs is in Ezekiel. And we read picking up in chapter 36 and verse 16. And moreover, the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Israel dwelt in their land, they defiled it by their own way and by their own doings. Their way was before me as the uncleanness of a removed woman. Wherefore I poured my fury upon them for the blood that they shed upon the land, and for the idols wherewith they had polluted it. And I scattered them among the heathen, and they were dispersed through the countries. According to their way and according to their doings I judged them. And when they entered into the heathen, whither they went, they profaned my holy name. And when they said to them, These are the people of Yahweh, and are gone forth out of his land. But I had pity for my holy name, which the house of Israel had profaned among the heathen, whither they went. Therefore say unto the house of Israel, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, I do not this for your sake, O house of Israel, but for my holy name's sake, which ye have profaned among the heathen, whither you went. And I will sanctify my great name, which was profaned among the heathen, which ye have profaned in the midst of them. And the heathen shall know that I am Yahweh, saith the Lord Yahweh, when I shall be sanctified in you before their eyes. So a point of interest. Yahweh's honor was brought to shame by his own people, who walked contrary to God's ways. And so God punished them by sending them into exile. To restore his honor, Yahweh, I've lost my point. To restore his honor, Yahweh will forgive his people and bring them back to his land. Did you know that Moses recognized how Yahweh's honor would be disgraced if he destroyed Israel on the way out of Egypt? So he appealed to Yahweh for his name's sake. In Exodus chapter 32 and starting in verse 9, And Yahweh said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, and that I may consume them, and I will make of thee a great nation. So here we see Yahweh ready to destroy the people that he had just brought out of Egypt. And Moses is appealing and pleading to Yahweh. And he uses this appeal in verse 11. And Moses besought Yahweh his God and said, Yahweh, why doth thy wrath wax hot against thy people, which thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak and say, For mischief did he bring them out, to slay them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from thy fierce wrath, and repent of this evil against thy people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or in Israel, thy servants to whom thou swearest by thine own self. And say unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of it will I give unto your seed, and they shall inherit it forever. And because of Moses' appeal, Yahweh repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people. And why? For Yahweh's name's sake. So Moses stood in the gap for Israel, despite their hard-heartedness, because he wanted Yahweh's honor to be maintained in the eyes of the nation. And so the second occurrence of walking And the Spirit occurs in Ezekiel 36. So it's picking up in verse 24. For I will take you from among the heathen and gather you out of all countries, and I will bring you into your own land. Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean from all your filthiness and from all your idols, and will I cleanse you. And a new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes. And ye shall keep my judgments and do them. And ye shall dwell in the land that I gave to your fathers. And ye shall be my people, and I will be your God. And I will also save you from all your uncleanness. And I will call for the corn and will increase it, and lay no famine upon you. And I will multiply the fruit of the tree and of the increase of the field, that ye shall receive no more reproach of famine among the heathen. And then shall ye remember your own evil ways and your doings that were not good, and shall loathe yourselves in your own sight for your iniquities and for your abominations. And not for your sakes do I do this, says Yahweh. But be it known unto you, be ashamed and confounded for your own ways, O house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, in the day that I shall have cleansed you from all your iniquities, I will also cause you to dwell in the cities, and in the waste shall be builded. And the desolate land shall be tilled, whereas it lay desolate in the sight of all that pass by. And they shall say, this land that was desolate is become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste and the desolate ruined cities are become fenced and are inhabited. And then the heathen that are left round about you shall know that I, Yahweh, build the ruined places, and plant that was desolate. For I, Yahweh, have spoken it, and I will do it. And before I finish those last two verses, it just came to my mind that you notice in verse 36 that Yahweh, or in verse 35, he said that Yahweh will build the waste and ruined cities. And then in verse 36, and he says that the heathen that are left around about you, they shall know that I, Yahweh, build the ruined places. And if the patterns continue, and if these are words of prophecy, then in the end days, in the days that I think we're in, will he do the same? Will he build the waste places so all the nations around will know that Yahweh has spoken it and will do it? So something to think about. So picking up in the last two verses, in verse 37, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, I will yet for this be inquired of by the house of Israel, to do it for them, and I will increase them with men like a flock. As the holy flock, as the flock of Jerusalem in her solemn feast, so shall the waste cities be filled with flocks of men, and they shall know that I am Yahweh. So, what is the correct interpretation in context to walk in the Spirit in Ezekiel? He said that I will put my Spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and ye shall keep my judgments and do them. And so I ask, does the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, teach a different concept of what it means to walk in the Spirit that Ezekiel describes? Well, the Greek word for walk appears to align with the concrete meaning of the Hebrew word halak. It's the Greek word peripataho, and it means to tread all around, that is, to walk at large, especially as proof of ability, figuratively to live, to deport oneself, or follow. So if we look at our first use of the term walk in the Spirit, it's in Romans chapter 8, starting in verse 1. It says, there is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in the Messiah, Yeshua, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah Yeshua hath made me free from the law of sin and death. And I would point out here that this law that we were made free from is the law of sin and death, the penalty for sin. The law, what identifies sin, the righteousness of the law, the Torah, is not what we're freed from, but it's the penalty from sinning against that law. Verse 3, for what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh. And so another note, was the law or Torah weak? Was the law flawed? Was the Torah not perfect? Is that really what Paul was saying in Romans chapter 8? Well, in Psalms 19, verses 7 through 11, the writer writes that the law of Yahweh, the Torah of Yahweh, is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of Yahweh is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of Yahweh are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of Yahweh is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of Yahweh is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of Yahweh are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. So I ask again, so what was weak? What was flawed? What was not perfect? The simple answer was man, the flesh. What could the Torah not do? It could not make us righteous. So how do we become righteous? By faith. It's always been by faith. By faith in Messiah, by faith in the promises of the Messiah. So, who is considered living by faith? Those who walk after the Spirit and obey the Torah. And then in Romans, picking up in verse 4 of chapter 8, it says that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us. Now remember, what the law could not do, it could not make us righteous. So how do we become righteousness? Paul explains that the righteousness of the law might be filled in us who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For they that are after the flesh do mind the things of the flesh, but they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. To be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. And here's the answer of what it means to be spiritually minded, or a mind after the flesh. Verse 7, because the carnal mind is enmity or hostile against God, for it is not subject to the law or the Torah of God, neither indeed can be. So then they that are in the flesh cannot please God. So we see here that to be carnally minded is living after the flesh, because the carnal mind is hostility against God. It does not subject itself to the Torah. So those that do not subject themselves to the law of God are living in the flesh and carnally minded. Picking up in verse 9, but you, who, those living in the Spirit, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if so be that the Spirit of God dwells in you. So now if any man have not the Spirit of Messiah, he is none of his. And if Messiah be in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the Spirit is life because of righteousness. But if the Spirit of him that raised up Yeshua from the dead dwell in you, he that raised up Messiah from the dead shall also quicken your mortal bodies by his Spirit that dwells in you. So therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, but to live after the flesh. For if we live after the flesh, ye shall die. But if ye through the Spirit do mortify, what? The deeds of the body, ye shall live. In other words, those that obey the Torah, by mortifying the deeds of the body, you shall live. And again, it's not your righteousness that makes us live, but it was through Messiah, through faith in him. So the last place this phrase is used, to walk in the Spirit, is in Galatians. And we covered this in our study on Galatians. Picking up in chapter 5 and verse 16, it says, "This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." And I just want to make a comment here that, the culture today in a lot of churches of walking in the Spirit, it's almost like it's this cloud nine experience that one experiences, like an out of the body experience when things may come upon you and you speak uncontrollably or something of that nature. But when we look at all the examples in the Bible of being filled with the Spirit, being led by the Spirit, walking in the Spirit, God is a God of order, and He is a God of rules, and He established those guidelines in the Torah. And so when we think of this concept of walking in the Spirit, it's not this out-of-body experience that many think it is. It's something very, very literal and something very basic that He gives us, because He teaches us spiritual things through physical things that He has created. So verse 17, "For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that you would. But if ye are led by the Spirit, ye are not under the law." Now, if you were part of the study that we did on Galatians, putting this, Paul's letter into context and putting this specific verse into context, when he made the statement, "You're not under the law," this law was very specific that he was referencing here. The context here is referring to the law of circumcision, because the battle was was this idea between, does Gentiles need to become circumcised to be saved? And the council in Acts 15 determined no. And so this was a context here. So what Paul's saying here to the Gentiles, if you're being led by the Spirit, you're not required to be circumcised according to the law of Moses, physically circumcised. So picking up in verse 19, "Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, of which I tell you before, as I have also told you in times past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God." And where do we learn these things that we're not supposed to do? We learn them from the Torah. We learn them from the instructions from the beginning. Then verse 22, it says, "But the fruit of the Spirit, those that are living according to the Spirit, those that are walking in the Spirit, those that are being led by the Spirit, those that are filled with the Spirit, these are the actions and the responses to that life." In verse 23, picking up in verse 22, the fruit of the Spirit is love, is joy, is peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. Against such there is no law, there is no condemnation in the Torah for these fruits of the Spirit that Paul mentions here. In verse 24, it says, "And they that are Messiahs, they have crucified the flesh with the affections and the lusts." So if we live in the Spirit, let us walk in the Spirit. And let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another and envying one another. So the context of walking in the Spirit is consistent all throughout Scripture. The concept is walking in the path that God has laid out for the inhabitants of the earth. His instructions of Torah that leads to life. Just as the river that we mentioned in Genesis that split into 4 rivers coming out of the Garden of Eden that flowed. It flowed with living waters. So is the path that God expects us to walk. And so that is the context, that is the examples, that is the pattern that the Scriptures teach concerning walking in the Spirit. And I want to mention the covenant that was prophesied to come. The new covenant, renewed covenant, is to make, that he's going to make with us, is as follows. It's in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34. Behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was a husband to them, says Yahweh. But this is a covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith Yahweh, I will put my Torah in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. Now, the reason I use the term renewed, because again, these are translations of the original text. And so the translators are trying to convey the correct idea with the language that they're translating it into. And this idea of new, this new covenant, is something that isn't something totally different. But as we read there, that he is going to write his Torah on their hearts. It's the same instruction that he gave them at Mount Sinai. And if you notice, it mentions in the verse here that we just read that that he is a husband to us. Okay, and what does that have reference to? It has reference to a wedding, and so he's going to renew his wedding vows. And then in verse 34 it says, "And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahweh. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, saith Yahweh. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more." So what was different about this covenant, this renewed covenant that he's going to make with the house of Israel in the end? He says he's going to write it on their hearts, on their inward parts. And we will be their God, or he will be our God, and we shall be his people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for they all shall know me. So the difference is that they all will know him. They all will follow him. They all will keep, that marriage contract that they weren't able to keep back at Mount Sinai. So, in closing, the wedding vows will be renewed, and the covenant will never again be broken. The patterns and examples of being filled, led, and walking in the Spirit are clear. God works through people who strive to follow his Torah in many different ways, from the skilled craftsman to the one who receives visions or performs miracles. All are led by his Spirit. This is God's design for the body. Members that look different, have different functions, but are of the same body. And I think Paul said it very well when it comes to spiritual gifts. In 1 Corinthians 12, starting in verse 20. But now are there many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of thee, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. No, much more those members of the body which seem to be more feeble are necessary. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor. And our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. For our comely parts have no need, but God hath tempered the body together, having given more abundant honor to the part which lacked. That there should be no schism in the body, but that the members should have the same care one for another. And whether one member suffer, all members suffer with it. Or one member be honored, all members rejoice with it. Now ye are the body of Messiah, and members in particular. So we're living in a time when the bride, the church, should be preparing herself for the return of the bridegroom, Yeshua the Messiah. Yeshua's mission was to reconcile the whole family back together to him. And he gave us appointed times to prepare as a complete body, not fragmented. He wants the wedding party to come together as one, like a wedding rehearsal where the whole family gathers to prepare. So, as I mentioned in the beginning in part 1, the purpose of the study was to help the believers consider the many members of the body, the many different aspects of being led by the Spirit, of being filled by the Spirit, of walking in the Spirit. And let's continue to work to bring this body together rather than divide, and allow the differences in ministrations of the Spirit to complement each other and to carry each other until Yeshua returns. So I hope this study, this series, has been a blessing. And if you have any comments or questions, my contact information is on our website at mnlt.org. And I'd be happy to go over any questions or comments you may have. So, shalom, and may Yahweh bless you.